SpaceX Starship prototype ignites 6 engines, starts major brush fire. SpaceX has successfully fired all 6 engines on its latest Starship prototype, taking an important step towards preparing the upper stage for the rocket's first orbital launch attempt. Unfortunately, the same successful static fire from Starship's upper stage, which could produce about twice the thrust of SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket booster, could set superheated debris hundreds of feet away and ignited large wildfires. This isn't the first major fire caused by Starship activity in South Texas, and probably won't be the last. The S-24 Starship successfully performed its first static fire on the 9th of August, igniting 2 Raptor engines. Several unsuccessful attempts to test additional engines followed later in the month, with SpaceX finally deciding to replace one of its 3 Raptor vacuum engines in its Starship S-24 in early September. Decided and tried again. Hoshi finally lined up on September 8 after workers installed new engines and buttoned up ship number 24. At the start of the test, SpaceX pumped hundreds of tons of liquid oxygen, or LOX, and a much smaller amount of liquid methane, or LHC4, into ship number 24 in about 90 minutes. Where the cryogenic liquid touched the uninsulated liquid, created a layer of crispy frost in places, rocket steel tank. No frost formed on Starship's upper methane tank. That is, SpaceX loaded only methane fuel into internal header tanks intended to store propellant for landing. The hundreds of tons of liquid oxygen were therefore probably intended as ballast, allowing the Starship to reduce the maximum load holding the rig on the ground. This potential stress is significant. Equipped with upgraded Raptor 2 engines, Starship S-24 was capable of producing up to 1,380 tons, approximately 3 million lbf of thrust when all 6 first launched at 4:30 p.m. CDT. In addition to breaking the record for maximum thrust produced during the Starbase rocket test, the ship's 24 engine burst for nearly 8 seconds, making it the longest static fire ever staged in a Starship test stand became one. A few wildfires were visible shortly after the clouds of dust and steam disappeared. Perhaps a combination of extreme force, heat, and burning time caused the near-complete disappearance of the unprotected concrete surface beneath number 24. Despite continuing evidence that the system makes all static fire operations on Starship easier and safer, SpaceX has opted not to install significant water flood or flame deflection systems on Starbase test stands and launch pads. I still refuse. Instead, under her Starship test stand made of steel, SpaceX relies on her one mediocre spray nozzle and hot concrete, presumably Martite. In some instances, spacecraft shatter this weak maltite formation, creating high-velocity ceramic fragments that damage the underside of the hull and the Raptor engines, requiring repairs and creating a dangerous situation. So without an attempt to control the exhaust of a Raptor at thousands of degrees high speed, a Starbase static fire test would most likely result in a small grass fire causing minor damage. However, these fires rarely propagate. His first 6-engine test of Ship 24 was unsuccessful, but the Starship appeared to emerge unscathed. In a blast furnace condition of perhaps 8 seconds, the top layer of concrete around it melted, creating a hailstorm of small, superheated spheres in nearly every direction. It began. At several locations to the south and west, shrubbery caught fire and began burning unusually violently, quickly growing into a wall of flames that raged throughout the site. On the east side, debris even got into SpaceX's trash cans, the contents of which easily ignited and burned for hours. Eventually, around 9 p.m. CDT, firefighters were able to approach the launch pad and missiles safely, but the main fire had already spread southwards out of range. Instead, they cleared the underbrush and began controlling burns near SpaceX's barricades in hopes of preventing the fire from spreading to the homes and residents of SpaceX's Starbase factory in Boca Chica village. Due to the estuary-like terrain and marshy nature of the choke point fire, it was very easy to stop, and it is possible that the fire posed no real threat to Boca Chica residents, SpaceX employees, or spectators. Also, it's unlikely that SpaceX's launch facility will be damaged or Starship 24 will be damaged in the first place. Both are surrounded by a combination of concrete aprons, empty earth fields, and highways. Still, the fire-burned bush is a protected habitat in state parks and wildlife sanctuaries. Fires are a natural occurrence and often a necessary component in many habitats, including parts of Boca Chica, but this was the second major wildfire caused by a Starship test since 2019 and is not desirable. May not. Extinguish fires around the space station would normally require, at a minimum, firefighters to enter or drive to protected marshes and salt flats, and the impact on wildlife and habitat would ultimately be as devastating as the fire itself. SpaceX's Federal Aviation Administration, or FAA, Programmatic Environmental Assessment, or PEA, gave the existing Starbase Texas facility and launch plan a full green light earlier this year, but has only discussed fires or PDF a few times. Not, however, restoring wetlands and preventing future damage has been addressed dozens of times and is subject to a number of conditions SpaceX must meet before the FAA grants the Starship an orbital launch license. The FAA approved this PEA because the 2019 wildfires caused by Starhopper, an early Starship prototype, it could have been as bad or worse than in 2022. Because I was aware of it. A licensing process is required, but the chances of it being a showstopper are almost zero. Still, if changes can be made to prevent large wildfires from becoming recurring random events, they could benefit SpaceX at least as much as the surrounding wilderness of Boca Chica.